trying to build a museum in downtown Montreal.
Thank you, Alice. Robin, you're next on my screen. You got to unmute though.
Sorry about that. My name's Robin Gofine, and I'm new to this group. I am the incoming, as of April 4th, Executive Director of the National Council of Jewish Women of Canada, Toronto section. So I look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you. Nazila, you're next on my screen.
Good morning, everyone. Such a pleasure to see you again. So my name is Nazila. I teach at University of Toronto Emmanuel College, and also I am one of the board of directors for Azerbaijani Women Support Center. So this is me, and proud to be here.
Thank you, Nazila. Monica.
Yes, I'm Monica Simon. I have been a member of NCJWC for 20 years and spent most of those 20 years in Toronto, moved to Montreal a year and a half ago, and I'm just very happy to be here to welcome those we haven't worked with, but delighted to be here to hear what's going to unfold.
Thank you, Monica. Debbie, you're on my next rotation.
Hi, I'm Debbie Wasserman, and I'm the current president of National Council of Jewish Women of Canada, and I'm also an active member of Toronto section. And we're really happy to be working on this initiative with all of you.
Thanks, Debbie. Eva.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. And it's a very great privilege to be on any kind of a panel with two Evas, very unusual.
Side by side.
I'm very happy to be here today. My name is Eva Cooper. I have spent my entire life in education, in the field of education in various capacities, and I am currently, and have been for quite a number of years, very involved with the Montreal Holocaust Museum. I sit on the board and several committees, and I'm also a speaker at the museum.
Thank you, Eva. So wonderful to have you. Linda.
Oh, hi. I've been involved with National Council of Jewish Women Canada, Toronto for many, many years. I've held many different positions, and I'm currently a VP along with my partner there, Debbie, who is president of Canada. So thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Dorothy.
I'm Dorothy Reitman, and I'm a past president of the National Council of Jewish Women of Canada. And I have to say that this committee is a highlight of my other activities because I think we have tremendous potential. And I thank you all for being here. And I'm looking forward with great anticipation to our meeting today and to our further developments. So I welcome you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. Firdaus, good morning. We're just doing a quick little intro of everybody.
Yes, good morning. Sorry. I'm Firdaus Ali. I represent the Canadian Council of Muslim Women. I've been doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work with many not-for-profit organizations, including Heart and Stroke Foundation. And I'm right now with Canadian Council of Muslim Women, enjoying my tenure with Nuzhat. And we have a very successful project that we are just folding up. It's called the Digital Anti-Racism Education Project. We've trained about 2,500 individuals across Canada. We've had a social media campaign. So I'm fortunate to be part of this wonderful group of women that are taking anti-racism to the next level. So thank you.
Wonderful, Firdaus. Thank you so much. And we participated in that, I'm proud to say, which was truly excellent. So without further ado then, ladies, I'm going to hand the session over to our wonderful guests who we have the honor and the privilege of welcoming this morning. And I'm going to ask, so that we record it properly, that we all mute in the meantime. And I'm going to definitely put you on speaker view, so it'll be just our guests who are featured during this. So with that, Alice and Eva, thank you so much. And I hand the stage over to you.
Well, excuse me. And as I mentioned a little earlier, I do have a bit of a cold, so you'll excuse my kind of throaty voice today. Thank you for inviting us. Both Eva and I are very honored to be here and happy to talk with other women who believe as we do that we have to work together to combat hate and racism in all its forms. This is an issue. Today we're talking about anti-Semitism, which is unfortunately much too contemporary. We see every day in the media manifestations, both of anti-Semitism and of hate towards other minority groups. And to understand the background, I don't know that you're going to learn a great deal today, but we'd like to do a little bit of a historical overview of anti-Semitism and then speak to the present and hopefully work together in a discussion format. We don't want to make a very formal presentation. We hope to pause at certain points during our presentation for discussion and questions. So I'm going to share my screen so you can see this basic little PowerPoint, but it has, as you can see, a plan for the presentation where we will talk about the evolution of anti-Semitism, Nazi Germany and the final solution, state anti-Semitism. Eva will give her testimony. Eva will intervene as well during the presentation. She's a person who has a great deal to say on this issue. And then speak to anti-Semitism and hate crimes today, universal problems of hate and how we as a museum try to address these issues. The question of Jewish values, how do they engage us in combating not only anti-Semitism, but hate in all its forms. And I hope we will have time to get to the IRA, non-binding anti-Semitism definition, because I was a bit involved as a Canadian delegate in defining it, also its predecessor, which is a definition of Holocaust denial and distortion. So that would be our plan, and I hope it meets with your approval. And with that, I'll start immediately to speak about anti-Semitism. So simply put, to define it, anti-Semitism is hostility towards or discrimination against Jews. It's a historical phenomenon. It has existed for 2,000 years. Some people say it is the oldest form of hatred. I don't think it's a competition, or at least not one that anyone would like to win. We know that hate and the diminishment of the other has existed as long probably as humankind has existed. I'd like to highlight nonetheless 3 forms of anti-Semitism, which we've seen throughout history, and there's been an evolution during that time. From antiquity to the Middle Ages, we can speak to a religiously based form of anti-Semitism, as Jews were seen to be the murderers of Jesus Christ, and seen then, this is a construct again of the church, but seen to be globally responsible for the death of the Messiah. Jews have been targeted really since the first millennium because of their divergent religious practices. As the church strove to establish its hegemony in Europe and in the world, it therefore persecuted those who did not follow the teachings of the church. And we can speak to 7th century Europe, the Spanish monarchy, where aided by the church, the monarchy demanded that Jews either convert or become slaves. This is one of the countless examples of efforts to convert Jews to Christianity throughout history, a prelude, obviously, to the Spanish Inquisition, which came much later, and which made Jews flee from Spain throughout North Africa and throughout Europe. By the 10th and 11th centuries, Jews nonetheless were a growing minority religious group within Europe, and they continued to be persecuted. During the Middle Ages, a new myth about Jews was created by the church, which is the blood libel myth, which you no doubt have heard about. I'm just going to show a little slide. And can people see the slides? Am I, yes, that's fine. So this is obviously from a German newspaper, Der Stürmer, and it was in the 1930s, but actually 1920 from what I can see in the text. But it is a picture of a young child being killed for his blood by Jews. And the idea was that Jews used children's blood, Christian children's blood, to create matzah or unleavened bread for Passover, and to substitute it for wine during religious ceremonies. And you can imagine the power that such a construct had on people, innocent children being murdered by Jews. And of course, this increased level of persecution. In the 19th and 20th centuries, we see the emergence of both political and economic anti-Semitism. The word anti-Semitism was coined actually in 1879 because of the prevalence of hatred towards Jews. During this period, Jews in Russia and the Ukraine were victims of violent pogroms. Pogroms are organized massacres, really, of innocent people. Whole villages were murdered. These were often encouraged by government and police authorities, and they were prompted by economic, political, and religious motivations to distract from other problems. I mean, this is really something that we see throughout history. Minorities, the scapegoating of minorities, it becomes more popular as problems in communities rise and there are no solutions proposed by government. It's a means of maintaining power. So we have also at this time the beginning of a myth of Jews as being greedy money lenders who are controllers of the economy and preoccupied by material goods. And this is a trope which continues today, as you know. Jews became moneylenders largely because other forms of earning their living were denied to them. They could not own land. They could not work for others. They were denied access to professions. And so this became the understanding of the Jew, and we see here, a stereotypic image, which was used again by the Nazi government. And we see these images again and again, and I'm sure that over time you have been witnesses to this. So this notion of Jews as seeking political and economic domination, excuse me, became very prevalent. Jews were accused of being the fomenters of communism, of being the biggest capitalists in the world. In other words, very divergent views, but all related to the idea of control of the world. And depending on who was doing the judging, those terms were used. As we know, there were certain works, books which were written, which became very popular. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, for example, which spoke to Jewish domination of the economy and of the world. And then later in the early 20th century, Mein Kampf. In the 20th century, we begin to see a kind of racial anti-Semitism. This is inspired by an understanding of eugenics, a theory which is, again, a social construct, that races exist and that there is a hierarchy of races. In other words, white Aryan peoples, whereas the Germans saw themselves to be, are at the top, the summit of this hierarchy, and others fall well behind and eventually are considered to be subhuman. So we have to remember that at the time Mein Kampf was written, Germany had just suffered an enormous defeat in World War I, that the economy of Germany was incredibly difficult, that people were unemployed, and again, scapegoating of minorities became very popular because of this. And as Germany suffered, it needed, I'm not legitimizing it, I hope you understand. I'm speaking from the voice of how it was used, needed to develop a national identity, which was one which was positive and made Germans feel proud of who they were and how they could rebuild their society. And so we have the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or the Nazi Party, which emerges and begins to increasingly have power based partly, in good part, on these Nazi racial theories. These eugenic theories don't come from Germany, honestly. Originally, they were defined in the States and in Britain. They were used to assure genetic selection. We know that this was seen as a solution to eliminate social problems. So, for example, it is certainly not only Jews who were targeted, but people of color, physically and mentally challenged people were all considered to be subhuman. Homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, people who were other than what was considered to be the Aryan ideal. When Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in 1933, Nazi racial theories received more legitimacy and greater public exposure and became much of the rallying cry used by Hitler. Mein Kampf, as the book, was often given to couples as they married. And so we have copies in our museum, which are signed by mayors of villages. And these were given as a wedding gift to these young couples. I'm going to just quickly show a slide of how one defined purity, racial purity. And this is part of the Nuremberg laws, which were adopted in 1935. And basically, I don't know if this chart is clear enough, but we certainly have a better version of it in our museum. But if a person had one Jewish grandparent, they were considered to be Jewish. So being Jewish or being a Sinti or Roma depended on an understanding of blood. That, this is something that could not be changed. A person who was not a practicing Jew, or in fact, not affiliated at all with the Jewish community, was still a Jew if he or she was seen to have Jewish blood, and is based on this kind of understanding that we see the persecution and the eventual effort to a final solution to eliminate, murder all Jews in Europe and in fact around the world. So this kind of understanding, this kind of thinking, this classification system of human beings still has implications for racializing groups today, minority groups today. We don't use, few people would refer to the Nuremberg laws. However, this understanding of your bloodline and what that means in terms of where you fit in the human hierarchy is certainly used by white supremacist groups today. And I think we see it a lot online. It's very, very prevalent, and it leads to what I'll speak to later, which is the question of hate crimes in our own society. So I'm not going to continue to detail that. I think that people here really are aware of these things, and I'd like us to go from this understanding of how anti-Semitism was propagated in Nazi Germany to the question of the Holocaust. And I'm going to ask Eva to speak to her story. I'm going to take away the PowerPoint for now because I think it's distracting, and we'll go back to it a little later.
Thank you, Alice. So I'm very happy, as I said before, to be able to talk to you today and to tell you, to give you a short version, because many details, of course, because of time, have to be removed from the story, which gives you sort of a less rounded perspective, but still a perspective which I think is valuable in the context of what Alice has just said. It's an incredible story. It's a story of survival during World War II. And we begin in one of the most ominous times and places in modern history, in Warsaw, Poland, 1939. I have often wondered why my parents, Abram and Fela Kupferblum, both educated and worldly, would choose to bring a child into this world knowing what they must have known at the time. Were they simply being human in their optimism and natural desire to have a normal, fulfilled life? Did they not trust that what Hitler had promised in his book, Mein Kampf, would spread to the entire neighborhood of Europe? By the time I was born, in February of 1940 in Warsaw, the die was cast. And soon Poland and her neighbors were engulfed in one of the most horrific periods of human history. Never before had a government designed a systematic and terrifying plan to eliminate an entire people from the face of the earth. And it was not only the Jews, but the Roma, the disabled, the homosexuals, all judged to be subhuman, especially the Jews. One day in 1942, when I was 2 years old, my mother and I, along with hundreds of other women and children, were herded to Umschlagplatz. We were in the ghetto, in the Warsaw Ghetto, for what the Nazis euphemistically called resettlement. A cousin of my mother's, Regina Banker, who worked as a prison guard in the ghetto, rushed to the loading platform upon hearing that we had been rounded up. She arrived there just in time to see my mother, carrying me, being forced into one of the waiting cattle cars. She ran to that cattle car screaming that I was her child and that my mother was simply minding me. For some unfathomable reason, my mother was permitted to pass me hand to hand, until I was literally thrown off that cattle car into Regina's arms. The doors of the cattle car slammed shut, and eventually the train pulled away. That was the last time anyone saw my mother or any of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other women and children on that train, and hundreds and hundreds of other trains like it. My mother was murdered, along with countless others, within 1 hour of her arrival at Treblinka, the notorious killing camp, where 900,000 people were murdered in 16 months. Regina's amazing courage at this moment, and my mother's, the choice she made against all odds, which could easily have led to her own instant death, gives me pause to this day. Only as a mature adult did I truly understand the choices made by Regina and by my mother. To pass a beloved child off forever in order to take that infinitesimally small chance that she could possibly be saved from certain death, a choice so unnatural for a mother, whose every instinct cries out to hold her child close, to protect her with her own life. A choice unbelievably heroic and prescient under the circumstances. Truly a miracle. My father made the difficult decision to escape from the Warsaw Ghetto, where life had become simply unendurable, by carrying me through the sewers, though many had perished in the attempt. Once out, and using an assumed Christian name and forged identity paper, he arranged for me to be hidden by Hanka Rembowska, a woman of uncommon goodness. She looked after me for several months, despite the very real danger to her own life, until she could no longer do so because of her own deteriorating health. Desperately looking for a place for me, she came upon a group of nuns, one of whom she knew vaguely. She pleaded with that nun to take her little girl, since these nuns were already looking after a number of blind children. The nun reluctantly agreed, and I remained with the nuns until the end of the war in 1945, when my aunt found me and returned me to my father. After the war, we lived in Poland as non-Jews. We kept that name that my father had assumed during the war, in spite of all the tragic events which had been perpetrated on us by the Nazis. Sadly, it was still not safe to live openly as a Jew in post-war Poland. Poland is a Catholic country, and I went to a state school, studied catechism, had my first communion at the age of 6, and was well indoctrinated in the fine art of anti-Semitism. My father remarried in 1947, and we immigrated to Canada in 1948. It was on that ship, bringing us to this new land, that my father told me as gently as he knew how, that we were Jewish. I was appalled. I was a Catholic child who prayed, had her first communion, went to confession. It couldn't be true. It took me many years to become comfortable with my Jewish identity and to take pride in the history and contributions of my people. So I grew up in Montreal, and the Holocaust was ever present in our family life. But my father and stepmother talked very little about it to me, and I didn't ask. I wanted to be a Canadian kid, like my friends, and was not curious about our history at all. As an adult, even as an adult, I had not been interested in returning to Poland to explore our family history. But my younger daughter, Felisa, who is named for my mother, whose name was Fela, had a compelling interest in the Holocaust and in the effect it had on our family. She urged me to return to Poland with her. And in 2005, as I prepared for the trip, I researched convents online in the south of Poland, where I knew that I had been hidden, and found one which had looked after children during the war. I made an appointment to visit with Felisa. A friend had also given me the name of an American genealogist, Yael Reisner, who lived in Warsaw, and who, she said, would be able to help me. So when we arrived in Warsaw, I called Yael, and we went to his office in the Jewish Historical Institute. He was busy with another family, and he had warned us that we might have to wait. And we waited for him while exploring a photo exhibit and film documenting life in the Warsaw Ghetto. This was in the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw. The photos, taken by Nazi officers on their day off for their own amusement, were graphic images of the horror of life in the ghetto. We waited for 4 hours to finally see Yael. And this is very unusual for me. I'm not a person that has a lot of patience to wait for 4 hours for something that I wasn't really convinced that I needed, but something kept me there. When I began to tell him that I had been hidden in a convent for blind children in the south of Poland, he dashed to his bookcase, and from about 1,000 books, he extracted one which documented convents which had been instrumental in saving Jewish children. The book is called Your Life is Worth Mine, and it's written by Eva Korek. It's actually a PhD thesis. He came upon a passage which said that a nun, a Sister Clara Yaroshinska, a member of the Franciscan Order of the Cross, whose mission was to educate and care for blind children, had saved the life of one Jewish little girl. We were speechless, certain that this little girl was me. Yale gave us the contact number for the convent. After some problems with the telephone number, I succeeded in reaching a nun at the convent. I explained to her who I was and the purpose of my call. Hesitantly, I asked if someone who had been with me at that time could possibly be still alive today. At that time, it was 60 years later. Sister Jana Pawła, the name of the Polish nun, and that I spoke to, and also many of the nuns in Poland are named for the Polish Pope, told me the incredible news that Sister Clara, now 94 years old and blind herself, was still alive. Her memory and sense of humor were intact, and she assured me that she would be absolutely the happiest to see me. We arrived in Laski, south of Warsaw, about 15 kilometers south of Warsaw, where the order operates the Institute for the Blind, which cares for and educates over 300 blind and some deaf children aged 3 to 19 today, as they did before the war. We were taken to the house where the older nuns live, and Sister Clara emerged, supported on each side by a younger nun. She was told that I was there, and she immediately spread her arms wide in welcome, and I flew into them. Because I was so young during the war, I had no memory of her, not her face, not her voice, nothing. Yet when I was in her arms and we were holding each other and crying, I felt like I had come home, a strong connection. I call it emotional memory, and it was very moving. Somewhere in my being, I have stored the memory of this woman and what she had meant to me at that time in my life when I needed her most. We sat together and we shared memories. She told me that she had fallen in love with me, a tiny child with bright dark eyes and an engaging manner. When she met Hanka Rembowska, who begged her to take me, I apparently ran to her, put my arms around her legs, because that's probably as high as I could reach, and looking up at her face, I said, "Please pick me up." She said that God had brought me to her, and she had no choice but to risk her life and the lives of all who were with her during the war by taking me. It was, she said, the right, the moral thing to do. It was what she had been taught. Sister Clara died in 2010 at the age of 99, despite having promised to wait for my next visit at the age of 100. But we had the last 5 years of her life to strengthen our relationship. I spoke to her often on the phone and saw her 3 more times before her death. My reunion with her changed my life. It made me aware of the most precious gift she had given me. Not only the gift of life, as if that wasn't enough, but also the gift of love. She had made it possible for me to be the person that I am today, a person who loves her family, her friends, her community, and who finds pleasure and sustenance through contact with others and through giving back to society. After a lifetime of work in the field of education and educational administration, I retired in 2005 and have devoted myself to volunteer work, all of it important, but my major mission has become Holocaust education. Share my story, believing that it will make my audiences understand our history, with the hope, however slim, that we can create a world in which all that we have in common as human beings will be more important and binding than the differences which tear us apart. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. I know it's hard to tell such a significant story in such a short time, but as always, you spoken magnificently. And your story is one, honestly, we all know of solidarity and hope. It is in the context, unfortunately, of a period of history in which 6 million people were killed because of who they were. 6 million Jews and many others were killed because of who they were at that time. I'm going to ask that if there are any questions or comments that you'd like to make at this time before we go on to Canada and more contemporary times. Any questions, comments for Eva or for me? No?
Sorry, I had one question for Eva. Thank you for sharing. And there were moments that I needed to take a break. But were there any times when you felt very cynical, when people go through a lot of hate or have seen hate attacks? I work with a lot of Muslim women who have. It makes them like, they are in despair and they're cynical, towards life before the love comes. So was there a moment in your life when, the hatred maybe engulfed you or made you think otherwise?
Well, I was very lucky in that I was very young, so that I don't have, unlike older survivors who tell their story and for whom the horror that they witnessed comes alive in their minds and in their memory. In my life, I have no memory of horror. Even when I was with the nuns, when I had to be hidden, when the Nazis were around, in a dark hole in the cellar of a small farmhouse, even the things that would be horrific to a 3 or 4-year-old child, I have no memory of them. Whether I've suppressed that memory or whether I just don't remember. I think very few of us have memories before the age of 3 or 4. So it's much easier for me to tell the story than it is for older survivors. And I haven't, I've after the war, I've never been hungry. I've never been deprived. I have been deprived. My greatest deprivation was the deprivation of my mother. And that is something that I mourn. Has it made me bitter? I'm not a bitter person. I'm a sort of glass half full kind of person. And I think that hate hurts the hater more than it hurts the people that you're hating. So life is too short. Life is too precious. And that I learned from my experiences.
Thank you.
I would say to you from, honestly, from the privilege I have of having worked with many survivors over the last number of years, that although people feel bitter about their experience, that it was horrific. Many people lost their whole families, their whole communities, their whole lives were destroyed. Hate is not what surfaces when people talk about their story. In fact, people want to be able to continue to live. It's surprising how what comes to the fore in the end is the effort to rebuild and to try to have a life which is as normal as possible despite the horror experienced. And someone I'm thinking of Ted Bolger, who's 95 years old now, often says hate will not bring you anywhere. Hate is not a motivation. There is no revenge. There is no redemption either. However, we have to continue to live. And I've had children. I've had another life. I was able to do that here. And people are appreciative of that. I see that Nazila has a question, comment.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brother Alice and Eva. Incredibly, overwhelmingly, when I listened to your story, Eva, I felt kind of deep-seated sadness within me, and kind of you touched that button, and I wonder about your father. He did survive through this horrific terror and genocide. So how your father coped with that emotionally, mentally, and what helped him? What is his story of hope?
Strangely enough, I don't know all the details of my father's story. He would never tell me. But I can tell you that he was not a man of hate. He was a man of hope. He was a man of energy. He was an optimist. He was a doer. He told me that during the war, he was not afraid. He said he was sure, 100% sure, that he would be killed during the war. And it really didn't matter, especially after my mother was murdered. Whether he died today or tomorrow or next week, or whether he survived another 2 or 3 months. So he took risks. He and a cousin in his family were really responsible for saving everyone in our family who was in hiding. And he took great risks to do that. And that's who he was. I never felt hate from him. He never wanted to return to Germany, but he never returned, meaning visit, because we had not been in Germany. He studied in Belgium. He was a chemical engineer, and he had been sent from Poland by his family, who really scraped together the money, because as a Jew he couldn't attend university in Poland, and that was common in Poland. It was the rule in Poland, but in other parts of the world, including in Canada. I mean, McGill had quotas for Jewish students until the 60s in certain faculties. So he didn't dwell it was always a part of him, and he wouldn't talk about the story to me. He would have nightmares if he ever did. And the reason that I know the details that I was able to share with you is that because about 6 months before his death, I brought him to my house for lunch, and I asked him to tell me his story. And he said, no, he said, I won't. But he said, I will tell you your story. And I taped it. And I didn't listen to it for many, many years. But on the sort of the very urgent urgings of my daughter, Felisa, I put that together. And the story has been published by the Israeli Foundation in their memoirs, in an anthology. It was done in 2017. I don't know if I answered your question.
Monica, you had a question. You're muted right now.
I'm trying to unmute. Eva, thank you for this gripping account of your story. It's so incredibly moving. I did not know at all what you had endured, and the fact that you are so positive and so life embracing and forgiving is just amazing. I wondered what your aunt, if you had any contact, any other recollection of her, because she really is the person who made you survive.
Are you speaking about Regina, the one who saved me from the train?
Yes, yes.
She was my mother's cousin. And unfortunately, she followed my mother to Treblinka several months later. I guess when her usefulness was already not important to whatever the life in the ghetto was at the time. She unfortunately was murdered as well.
If I might just say, Eva, how much, like all of us, I so appreciate you sharing your incredibly heart-wrenching story. And I think it's especially so deep for us as mothers, and what this, when we say a survivor, what survival means. And wow, it's, so it's not, it has so many manifestations, and I'm still kind of tearful just even thinking about that. So
thank you. Yeah, I wanted to return for a minute. Sorry.
Yeah, so thank you.
I wanted to return for a moment to something you said, Monica. You said forgiveness, or you said forgiving. And I don't think that I am forgiving. I don't think it's up to me to forgive. I don't think it's my job, my duty, my obligation to forgive. These things are not forgivable. But whether they're forgivable or not, as Ted Boger said, life goes on. And, it's important. We have a life force that is it's absolutely incredible. People, I know that all of you probably know people who've suffered terrible things, and yet they cling to life. And this is what the survivors did. They clung to hope. They clung to life. And I like to think of it in those terms rather than in terms of forgiveness, because I don't think that I have either the responsibility, the duty, or the ability to forgive. I'd have to forgive 6 million deaths. And never mind the damaged people. We talk about 6 million people damaged. My father was damaged. My stepmother was terribly damaged. Everybody I know who survived the war did not survive intact. There's a lot to forgive.
If I could speak to this question just a touch, I think one of the most moving moments I ever had as at the museum was a request that came to us from young Rwandans who had survived the genocide in Rwanda and had come to Canada and wanted to meet with some Jewish survivors of the Holocaust to understand how they went about living and rebuilding their lives. And that meeting, really probably the most emotional thing that I've ever lived through, very positive. Again, not about forgiveness, not about, but many questions about how do you transmit memory? How do you assure that the experience can serve to rebuild? And how people actually had the courage to even do things like go back to school, start to work somewhere new, try to build a life in a strange land where you weren't necessarily very well accepted either, but things were definitely better than where you came from. And it's not because great wisdom was spoken, it's because of the human support which was offered. And survivors, I think of particularly one elderly couple of Jewish survivors who, in putting themselves in the shoes of these young Rwandans, were so empathetic, were so able to understand, but also almost in awe of what these young people had gone through, despite their own experience. And so, it speaks to our shared humanity and the unfortunate, very unfortunate commonality we have as minorities sometimes to live through horrific experiences and then to survive them and then to go on. And how do we go on together? And I know that this is a focus of your group, and I find it remarkably commendable. If people are ready, I would go on now to speak a bit about contemporary anti-Semitism and some of the hate that we see not only against Jews in our own society, but against Muslims and against anyone of difference, against Black people, against Indigenous people. Should I go on? Are you ready to do that? Yes.
Sorry, I just have one comment to make. I apologize.
Please.
But, I'm from India, and I just want to share that, I left India in 1996, which was very progressive, very secular. We have a lot of Jewish people among other, ethnicities that live in India and really worked well. It's the largest democracy in the world. And sadly, about 7 years ago, we have a fascist fundamentalist government at the center, and their sole priority is persecution of minorities, especially the Muslims, which comprise 20% of the population. So there's public lynchings. They've put a ban on beef, which is the beef trade is predominantly done by Muslims. So a lot of political, economical, religious atrocities every day. And, because it's become so common that people are getting desensitized. So, every day there's a newspaper carrying a story of few Muslim men being lynched, and now nobody cares. It's come to that stage. So I want to ask Eva that, we as humans have really not learned from history. We had a partition, India, Pakistan, one of the larger genocides, over 1 million lost their lives, displaced, etc. And yet 70 years later, you see the same thing happening, the same communal, hatred for each other. And the sad part is that the youth are involved. So if you go on Twitter, a lot of Indian youth are spewing hate And those were the hope, to say that, they could have saved India, to say the hate that is happening is wrong. We need to come together, forget our religion. So Eva, I want to ask you, how does that make you feel when you see, and not only in India, we see it in different parts of the world, where the hatred is coming back again. It's like as if we have not learned at all from history. And it doesn't matter if there was a Holocaust or there was another partition, people have forgotten that bit of history and are really having that acid in them to hate again. They have that burning desire to hate and to kill and to maim. So how does that make you feel?
Well, I think one of the greatest blessings that we have, and curses, is that we have freedom of choice. We have the freedom to do good, and we have the freedom to do evil. And that rests in each of us. And you're right. One could definitely feel hopeless. You don't have to even look at India, which is a wonderful example that you gave, or a horrific example which you gave. I think you can look at the internet in your own living room and you'll see the same thing. Young people spewing hate. Some of the truckers in Ottawa were not hateful, but some were there just to cause problems, just to spew hate, just to cause dissent in society. It's very easy to fall into despair. But again, as Ted said, there's no winning in despair. And I think that education, maybe because of my life work, maybe because of my work with the museum, I think education is our only tool. And it's a very slow tool. It's one person at a time. It's one group at a time. And the task is endless and it'll never be complete, because we do have the inclination in each of us to other people, to other people, to make ourselves feel more important, more successful, more whatever than someone else. We need to be better than, which makes the other person worse than. And that's the beginning. So yes, it could be a hopeless task. And it's true that sometimes I feel like, we're not making enough progress. And we aren't. We will never make enough progress because there is no enough. We just have to do as much as we can every time we have an opportunity.
I have one reaction here. I'm excuse me for my ignorance. I don't know much about the international kind of Holocaust efforts and activities across the globe. So I don't know what happens in Europe or Asia in terms of educating people about the effects of Holocaust. So honestly, I don't have any information about that. But I know that in Azerbaijan, where Muslims and Jews together were the subject of genocide in 1918 by Russian and Armenian armies, and there is a Holocaust memorial to celebrate the lives of people who were subject. Probably Azerbaijan is the only country where Muslims and Jews together, they were buried. So because of genocide, and that is in Cuba, and together with Azerbaijan and Israel, they built a memorial to celebrate the massive graves where Muslims and Jews together, they were kind of killed and buried together. That is the only example I can give to you in regards how Muslims and Jews together, they were subject to this kind of discrimination, not because of the religious identity, just because they identified themselves as Azerbaijanis. And this Muslim identity and religious identity was part of this genocide, because Bolsheviks and Armenians together, they targeted them also for being Jews and for being Turk and Muslim. So the only example I can give to you. But I always believe that stories are powerful. When I listen to your story, Eva, it overwhelmingly made me really very sad, very, very sad. And I am sure that it will stay with me. The sadness will stay with me. But at the same time, it gave me kind of a sense of responsibility. Kind of what is my role here to prevent it happening again. But we are here not only to listen, but at the same time, as an activist, we are here to make sure that it doesn't happen in our society. Eva says that we are mothers. As mothers, what we do, what kind of world do we live for our children? I don't want my children to live in society where they will see genocide and massacre again. And when I look at Ukraine, for example, it makes my heart cry. So I don't want Azerbaijan, and I don't want any other country to live this kind of Russian chauvinism again. So targeting people who resist them. So what is our responsibility? Like what are the tips you can suggest to us, Eva, so we can learn from you, like how we can fight hatred? I agree with you that forgiving, asking the victims to forgive is not the right thing, because justice cannot be achieved by forgiving. Justice can be achieved by justice only. So to making sure that the criminals are responsible for their actions. So probably in that sense, the victims at least can be relieved that they were punished for their crimes. But again, forgiveness is really very difficult thing to do. What you can suggest us to prevent?
Well, when you're speaking about forgiveness, the person that comes to mind is Eva Kor, another Eva, a tiny woman, I think even smaller than me, and I'm very tiny, who did forgive and who held in her arms her oppressor. And this was a huge outcry from the survivor community about why she was doing that, and they were very opposed to it. This is her feeling. And you're right, forgiveness does not bring anything back. Our work, I think, in prevention, of course, one person can't do very much, but one person did. When we look at in our Holocaust Museum, we have a section which deals with the righteous among the nations, like Sister Clara, and we hope that in our new museum, I hope that in our new museum, this wall will be expanded, especially to include people who saved other survivors in Montreal, if nothing else. But we have Wallenberg, and we have Sugihara, and we have the Portuguese consul. We have so many people. We have Sister Clara, whose family saved 4 people. If you save one life, it's as if you saved the whole world, is what we're taught in Judaism. And I think that our role is to remember, not to allow people to forget, because that would dishonor the memory of all those people who died during the war and also subsequently after the war, all the damage that was done after the war. We have to honor that. And so those of us who are survivors and who speak to groups, that is our motivation, to teach, to hope that people will remember, and to talk about responsibility. Because even when I talk to young kids, grade 6 children who are 12 years old, I say to them, you're very young. But even in your life, you have seen injustice. You have seen somebody bullied, whether it's in your home, whether it's on the bus, whether it's in the schoolyard. And you have a responsibility not to risk your life, but to get help, to tell someone, to support the victim. And that's how it has to grow. It has to grow one person at a time. I'd love to solve the whole thing, and so would you, so would all of us, but we can't. So all we can do is take these incrementally tiny steps towards a better future for humanity.
If I might, and I would continue with the presentation, I think that the work that we do at Montreal Holocaust Museum and at other organizations in Canada, this role of education, this role of remembrance, which goes beyond memory to action, that is, our logo written on our permanent exhibition is to learn, to feel, to remember, to act. And as an organization, we take position on issues that are contemporary, not only which affect Jews and anti-Semitism. We've taken position on immigration and refugee issues in Canada, because we are keeping people out who need to be in our country because they are not safe where they are. We've taken position on the Charter of Quebec Values, which I'm sure you all heard about, which really speaks to the question of freedom of religion, and to Bill 21. We speak out with other organizations on issues affecting Indigenous people. We educate about the residential school system with organizations who have that expertise and whose history it is, because we don't want to appropriate anybody else's history. We work with Muslim organizations. When there was the horrific murder of Muslims in a mosque in Quebec a few years ago, we were very active at the mobilizations and at the sensitization work. So for us, I mean, we work with 50 to 60 different organizations every year, academic institutions, community organizations, museums, organizations which represent diasporas of other genocides in Canada. And unfortunately, we have many, many genocides which have been perpetrated since the Holocaust. We have an exhibit which is called United Against Genocide, Understand, Question, Prevent. And for that exhibit, we have worked with the Armenian communities, the Cambodian community, the Rwandan community, the Uyghur community, the Rohingya community, really the most recent unfortunate victims of genocide, because their voices must also be heard. And so there are organizations in this country which hope to educate and do. I mean, we reach about 22,000 people in the permanent exhibit in our museum, but we have 25 pedagogical tools which are used across the country in French and English. We do teacher training. In the last 3 years, we trained 800 teachers across this country from coast to coast. We have virtual exhibits. Thankfully, during the pandemic, we increased those. But we also have traveling exhibits which speak not only to the Holocaust, but to these greater questions of how do you deal with prejudice and hate, and how can we do this together? So I think that there is hope, always in action. Hope, there was a Reverend Faye Wakeling who used to work in a poor neighborhood in Montreal, who wrote a book called Hope is in the Struggle. And I've used that term because to me, it really does speak to our efforts as human beings to try to make a better world. This is really what we all need to be doing together. We can't solve one form of hate without resolving the question of hate more generally. I think this group understands that fully, but we need people to understand that much more fully. I see that Dorothy, no, I didn't know if Dorothy wanted to say something, it wasn't your hand. So if I could continue very briefly, because I know the time is running out. Could you tell me how much longer you'd like us to, I know you have other group items that you'd like to process at the meeting. So how much more time would we have?
I cannot speak for everyone, but I would say we're okay till 10:30. Is that right, Firdaus, Nazila? Is that okay?
So let me go quickly to the question of today. Well, today, first to Canada, just briefly, because we like to believe that this is a country which is the home of the brave and the land of the free. I know that's an Americanism, but
it's the best country in the world.
Okay, so but we do have our problems here, and we know that. I'm just going to quickly go to the PowerPoint, but in Canada, I mean, the Jewish community was already settled before the Second World War. There were already 63,000 Jews living in Canada, largely in Montreal and Toronto. And the first Jew came to Canada in 1760. We often face a form of prejudice, which I know the Muslim community does as well. which is that we must all be immigrants because we're Jewish, right? I mean, there's no such thing as any kind of history of Jewish contribution to this country. We know this not to be true. But one of the first Jews to Canada came to Trois-Rivières. His name was Aaron Hart. His grandson became an elected official in what was then the Quebec Parliament, the National Assembly, in 1807. Sorry, it's his son, Ezekiel. He was not allowed to sit in the National Assembly because he was Jewish, although he had been elected to represent Trois-Rivières. And so we see that right from the beginning, there is some anti-Semitism here in Canada, which is different from that faced in Europe. There have not been massacres in the style of pogroms ever in Canada. However, we know that there have been incidents in many parts of the country. There have been efforts to exclude Jews from economic life, from social life. In Saint-Agathe, which is a small town in the Laurentians near Montreal, there were signs which basically said, and this is before World War II, Jews, this is a French-Canadian city, Jews scram while the going is good. There were park benches in Val-David, which is another small town, saying clearly no Jews or dogs allowed. So we talk about a new country, and a country where we have common values in theory of equality and humanity. These are not always upheld for minority groups. In Toronto, we've seen very recently a spate of incidents in Toronto schools. In Montreal, we had a firebombing of a Jewish day school. We are not in any sense exempt from anti-Semitism or from forms of hate. We saw the Ottawa blockade, one of the most difficult, it's not, I don't know if there's something that was at all positive about it, but when we saw people who were supposedly demonstrators wearing yellow stars of David, identifying themselves as victims in the ways that Jews had been victims during the Holocaust. Jews were slated for murder during the Holocaust. At the same time, we saw these people waving swastikas. And so the contradictions and the use of this memory is very difficult to complex, difficult to understand, but has to be combated. Every time the Montreal Holocaust Museum receives publicity about an event or makes an announcement of some sort, if you look at the social media comments, hate is incredibly present. And so people hide behind the anonymity of social media often to express it. So if we look at the worst, what can be considered perhaps the worst kinds of hate crimes, of hate, the worst forms of hate, we can look at the question of hate crimes, and they have been increasing steadily in Canada against minorities, religious minorities, and what we could call racialized minorities. And so there was a 47% increase in police reported hate crimes in 2017. And then they were somewhat stable for the years 2018 and 19. And now, just announced this week, as you may have seen, there was a lot of coverage in the Globe and Mail, 37% increase from 2019 to 2020. It is the highest number of hate crimes we have ever seen in this country. There was an 83% increase in religiously motivated hate crimes in 2017, both against Jews and Muslims at that time. Jews, who represent 1% of our population in Canada, are the butt of 65% of hate-related crimes motivated by religion. It's an enormous kind of proportion. Most recently in Montreal, there's been a tragic increase in hate crimes against Jews. I talked about the Toronto school system. We have a problem which surpasses obviously that of religious hate. In this past year during the pandemic, we have an unprecedented increase in hate crimes against Black people, almost double number from one year to the next, and a 300% increase of hate crimes against East and Southeast Asian people of that descent, I should say, because there are many of them Canadians for many generations. And so we see, and this is really the tip of the iceberg, because hate crimes are said to be reported perhaps at a level of 10%. And I don't even believe that that's true, because when you look at the crimes against Indigenous people, we have 73 hate crimes last year reported against Indigenous people. And we know we read about more than 73 cases just in the media. So people don't report because they don't believe that anything's going to be done. I recently participated in a panel, was the launch of a study by the Center for the Prevention of Radicalization Leading to Violence in Montreal. And they did a survey of Quebecers at that point, just ordinary Quebecers, and found that 5% of the people who were surveyed had experienced either a hate incident or a hate crime as a victim. And they admitted that there was a fault in their study, which was that the groups that are generally the victims of hate crimes, so religious minorities, racialized communities, and women and disabled people, were underrepresented in that study. So we know that this is a very prevalent problem, and I probably don't need to tell that to you, because I think we're all sensitized people. Well, Eva spoke briefly to the question of othering. It is a concept which I think is gaining in popularity. What does that mean? Why is it gaining in popularity? Because it's an easy way to explain to people, perhaps, how we begin to look at other people and categorize them as other than ourselves. And so really there are two very simple steps. One is to categorize a group of people according to a perceived difference, and differences such as ethnicity, skin color, religion, gender, sexual orientation, ability, tradition, cultural habits. And then secondly, to identify that group as inferior to us. And that is what we see over and over again. If we look at social media, if we look at the hate discourse online, if we look at who people are perceiving as leaders now, as alternate leaders to those who are established leaders, we see this understanding of a need for security, and therefore a need to create an other which is less than we are. We see it in the nationalism, we see nationalism growing not only, we see it to some extent here in Quebec, honestly, but we see it throughout Europe. We see a rewriting of Holocaust history in countries such as Poland and Hungary and the Ukraine and Lithuania. So a new understanding, a reinterpretation of facts, a creation of alternate facts, which becomes popularized as people seek answers that are simple, answers which will make them feel better, less isolated, more powerful. The pandemic, as we know, has contributed greatly to the isolation of individuals and the questioning of leaders, because there's no easy solution to this thing, right? We all know we are in this for a while, but it's very hard for people to accept, and particularly for people who have much less means, to live with this uncertainty, to lose their jobs, to not know how their children are going to grow up. They want answers. There are no easy answers in our world. The world has become quite complex. So I'm giving you a very quick survey of what the current situation is, but I think we've all seen how legitimate hate discourse has become, how slurs against peoples, how the destruction or at least the I'm sorry, I'm having trouble finding the word. Basically, the defacement of properties that are religious properties continues, how mosques are under attack, how synagogues are under attack, how individuals as they walk along the streets are harassed because of their difference. I agree with Eva that the only way out of this is education. We need, honestly, I believe, stronger political and other leadership, which speaks to values and speaks to history so that we don't repeat it. There's no guarantee that in knowing history, we will not repeat it. We've seen that, but it can inform our thinking and our decisions and our choices. And the bringing together of people of difference is a key, I believe, to working on these issues. And organizations, many of them have the will to do this. So we need to build strong organizations and work together, because the enemy is a common enemy. The manifestations of hate may be different. The experience of hate by victims is the same. A person who saw his mother macheted to death in the Rwandan genocide is not different from a person who saw his mother led to a gas chamber or shot. And it's not different from the experience of a lynching in India. There are too many experiences which have the same effect. I'm not going to speak very much to what we do at the Montreal Holocaust Museum, except to say that really we see our role as educational. We are expanding the museum because thankfully there is a great interest in learning about these things. And so for those who have no hope, I want to say to you, what is hopeful is that every year the visitorship of the museum increases. Every year, there are more visitors to our website, to our virtual exhibits. There are more teachers who want to be trained. There is an energy to change this world. And I think we want to be part of that, and we want to be downtown so that the question of hate and prejudice gets the recognition it needs to in the center of a large city. We are now in a Jewish community building, which is a wonderful thing. We're housed for free, except we want to be outside that Jewish community building. Our audience is almost entirely non-Jewish. 17% of our individual visitors are Jewish. About 4% of our schools that visit us, or the kids who come in the schools, are Jewish. So if that's who we are and who we want to be, that's who we want to educate, we need to be out there. Dorothy, I see you wanted to speak.
Yes, I hope you can hear me. I think I'm unmuted, but Alice and Eva, you have articulated so well the purpose of our Women to Women endeavor. And I have to say that we made a good choice in your performance today. I wish it could go on and on. I'm not trying to terminate, but I'm trying to say that everything you say is our agenda. And I'm sure that you will be an influence in us moving on. And education definitely is our priority. So you can continue. It's fascinating. Really wonderful. Unmute. Can't hear you.
Now you can, but I don't want to go on too long. I mean, I don't know that we're going to have the time to address questions of Jewish values, but know that they are values which inspire us, which speak to the question of healing the world, of welcoming the stranger, of tzedakah, which means social justice and not charity. I think that all of you are rooted in these common values. These are not they are Jewish values, but they are shared human values for people who want to see change and justice. I've already spoken to how we are all in this together. I could end with a small quote from someone you've probably heard before, Reverend. I don't know if we're going to have time. Do you want me to touch on the IRA definition? Do you want to give me that time? Okay, so let me go to that. Sorry. And so, sorry, here we go. Okay, so just to say that I was a delegate, Canadian delegate to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. I was a delegate from 2008 before Canada joined the Alliance formally until about 2015. And initially, the organization, which is made up of 33 member countries, all dedicated not only to, when we speak to remembrance, not only to memory of the Holocaust, but also to assuring education about, in general, the Holocaust and genocide and its prevention. It truly has a mandate of prevention, and it's based on something called the Stockholm Declaration, which was signed by many countries in the year 2000, including Canada. So our first effort really there was a working group on anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial. And as Holocaust denial was becoming more prevalent in Europe, particularly in countries like Hungary and Poland, we felt it important to define what that meant. And so we did, and I won't go into the details, but if you'd like to look it up, if you look up IRA, you will find the definitions. And secondly, then to define anti-Semitism. And I'd like to explain that the definition that was adopted by IRA in 2016, I was not there for the adoption, is considered a non-binding working definition. And it is, as you read it, clearly a working definition. It is not an action plan. It speaks to it says clearly, anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews, which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Sorry, I have trouble seeing the screen, okay. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, towards Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. So that is the definition. I think that no one, or there's been very little debate about this definition but that is the definition. After the definition, there are examples which have led to debate, some of which speak to the question of Israel and the demonization, or what is perceived to be the demonization of the state of Israel. It actually gives as examples the right, the absolute right to criticize Israel as one would criticize any other country. And I would be the first to tell you that human rights violations exist in Israel, as they do in just about every country in the world. But I think where people have gotten very, where there's been quite a bit of outcry, is that people are concerned that the examples that follow the definition will be applied in a way to curtail freedom of speech, to curtail legitimate criticism of Israel. And I'm going to tell you that certainly this was not the intention of IRA at all. In fact, it's clearly stated. And if you would like, I will send to everyone on this call, on this meeting, the links to the relevant IRA pages, so you can look for yourselves at the definition and the context in which these things were developed. In Canada, the definition as I have quoted it here, is what is included in the federal government's anti-racism strategy, and it is only included in the definition section, in which we also define Islamophobia, systemic racism, all the definitions that are used within that strategy. I'm going to stop here. If you'd like, I will show you that last slide. Just as an ending, if you don't mind. Hold on, sorry. Which is quite famous. And which really speaks, I think, to the work that you are achieving and trying to achieve, which is that we are all in this together. We are in this together because this battle is not one that can be won by one people, one religious group. The world is a very mixed place. There is no such thing as race. There is no such thing as purity. And ultimately, unless we combat hate in all its forms together, we are going to be losing this battle. So I think you can see it. I don't need to read it to you, correct? Okay. Thank you.
Wow. Well, before I close it, certainly, again, let's field any questions that anyone might have. Well, okay. I don't see any hands, but oh, Nazila, yes, please.
Yeah, I just wish our youth in our community, Azerbaijani community, to listen. That probably would be a kind of new experience for them. They already know, like in Azerbaijan, there is good system. They learn about this, but in Canadian context, I would like them to listen to what you said. And I don't know if you would have time to come, and we can also bring together Azerbaijani youth from United States and Europe, so they can listen to your wonderful presentation. And that's what I want to do. So,
I think it can certainly be arranged.
Yeah.
Call on us, please.
Mm-hmm. And also, if possible, I think that tomorrow our youth going to meet with MP Melissa Landsman and Yara Sachs. They are having meeting with her. That is going to be the third meeting with them. And I can bring it up, and probably she can also join. I don't know, kind of a collaborative effort, not limiting this to only listening to what you say, but also kind of having an alliance between Azerbaijani and Jewish youth. And they can have their own discussion as well.
And just to echo Nazila, I think that there is really opportunity at CCMW also to enhance our own learnings. We have 16 chapters across Canada. Yeah. We have a board, we have staff. And I feel that, these sessions, even if you're kind of attending them again, have so much value. There's so much compassion, there's so much learning from these, and these are shared pains, I feel, and shared victimization sometimes, which can really get into good power and be that collaborative voice that we all need against hate. So I will also take this to Nuzhat, who is our executive director, to see what opportunities arise this year for us to have a session like this. And I just wanted to thank all of you, especially Alice and Eva, for enhancing my learning today. It's been a wonderful opportunity. So thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Wow, wonderful, wonderful. And I just want to add that and share that that my parents are survivors, and my mother, whose false papers, thanks to Raoul Wallenberg, her false name was Eva. And she had said then that if she survives and she has a daughter that her name will be Eva. So I feel in my whole being and, you know, in every cell in my body that it is my responsibility to go on positive and to make an impact. And I just want to say that this gathering here today is the embodiment of that. And I am so grateful, Alice, Eva, for you to share what is now our ongoing dialogue of our hope that going forward, that there's so much we can do. I'm, you know, this is another important step in our work together, and that this is the springboard to our next step, so that we ensure that our youth, the next generation, grows up in loving kindness, so that, Nazila, we don't have to worry about our youth, that they're the ones who are carrying forward. So again, Eva and Alice, and everyone here today, thank you so much for taking this time for this truly important step. And Eva, as you said, you know, just one person at a time is you know what is most powerful and what we can do. And I know that we're going to go a little beyond that. But again, thank you so much.
I want to thank you all really for your openness and your wonderful comments and questions. And it's a privilege really to be part of this discussion. Thank you so much, really.
Thank you. And just so you know, you're an important resource for us now going forward. So you're tied into our network here. Yes,
right.
Thank you so much.
I just want to tell you one thing. When I worked at Kama Lodge long-term care home, I was a coordinator for spiritual and religious care, and I organized visits to Holocaust Museum in Toronto, the senior visit and staff visit to Holocaust Museum. And also sometimes my children, they were very small at that time. They were like 9, 11 years old. And they came to me to work one time, said, Mom, we want to see the way you work and what kind of clients you see. And I did take them, and then they saw a man, a Jewish man named Sam. He passed away, and my love and my regards to him, because he left an unforgettable memory in my children. And he talked to them, and after that, my son he says, Mom, what Sam told to us about love, he was a survivor of Holocaust. And he told his story, how he survived. He was a short man, but it kind of instinct told him that because the guards were choosing the short and the weak to kill and eliminate them. And it's an instinct. He told my children that instinct at that moment, he was 10 years old, told him that stood like on your feet, so you look taller. And my children still, they don't forget how he survived, because of instinct told him that he needs to show them that they are tall and he is strong. And they felt so sorry about that. I think that Eva, what you did, it's tremendously amazing and reminded me the story of Sam. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I'm going to, unless there's anyone else that wants to say something, I'm just again going to thank you and say have a beautiful day, ladies, and our Women to Women will reconnect and recollect and go for our powerful next steps. Yes. Goodbye to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Eva was trying to say something, but she's on mute.
Oh. Eva, were you gonna?
No, I was just saying thank you, and I'm wishing you all a good day and to stay safe.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.